Thank you. Wasn't that a great story? 1,000 megawatts of coal offline to biomass. Fantastic. Congratulations. Before I begin my talk, I want to take just one quick second, and I don't get the opportunity to do this very often. I just want to acknowledge the person that basically 10 years ago ordered me to start working on biomass. Ed Tessero, who you're going to hear tomorrow at lunchtime, talk about a project that we worked on to convert a college of about this size in Massachusetts that was electrically heated and cooled into a biomass district heating system. An incredibly successful project. Ed led the charge on that, and working for him, as you all know, in the bottom line of any job description, it says, are the duties as assigned? Well, I got assigned to do outreach and public information and curriculum development around biomass, and I've been working on it ever since. Just so happens that very recently, both Ed and I left the college to other pursuits, and we both work in Boston, and we work in two buildings right next to each other. We had to come up to North Bay to have a beer last night to see each other, which is pretty ironic. Lastly, I just want to welcome my daughter, Allison, who's joined me at this conference here today. I have to tell you that in the past 10 years, I've been doing presentations across North America and Europe, hundreds and hundreds of them. This is the first time a family member has actually heard me speak. This is not bring your child to work day. Allison has 2 degrees in engineering and is a green building analyst down in Toronto for an engineering firm. This is the next generation that's going to really take us out of the problems that we created in previous generations with climate change. So it's very cool. Welcome, Allison. Okay. So quickly, I'm going to be talking about 3 different areas today. Really some policies in Massachusetts that have allowed us to bring biomass forward into the mainstream. I'm going to talk about the Massachusetts Sustainable Forest Bioenergy Initiative, which has been a multi-year project really looking at biomass and some of the thermal activities that we feel are very appropriate for a small state like Massachusetts. We do have a renewable portfolio standard. We were the first state in the country to enact that standard many years ago. And as you can see here, well, first of all, Massachusetts is a pretty small state, and we work regionally. In our particular case, in the Neepool area, our electricity is provided by many different areas. So there are many states, New Hampshire, Maine, Rhode Island, Connecticut, that contribute to our electrical consumption, and I should say in Quebec also. And these are basically showing what the percentages of green renewable energy technologies that are being brought into the Massachusetts consumer over the next several years from the various states. By and large, biomass is the answer for us. We do have some wind resource, offshore wind in particular, which is, I don't know which one is more controversial, biomass or wind. Both definitely are down south, and I'm going to address that in a few minutes. But really, biomass is the key contributor to the renewable portfolio standard. There are privately proposed biomass generation stations on the books right now that the state is permitting and going through the process. And these are some of them, the 3 pretty large ones from Massachusetts. A 50 megawatt power plant in biomass, consumes 500,000 to 600,000 tons of wood chips a year. So in the scheme of things, for a little urban state, this is a lot of wood. And also, there's a existing coal plant that is trying to co-fire with biomass, and I believe up to about 20%, maybe 10%, which is again contributing factor on our forest resource, and making sure that we have enough biomass and sustainably, that I'm going to talk about in just a minute, to provide resource for feedstock for these plants. Massachusetts has done a lot to implement lots of green technologies, and particularly, again, biomass. In 2008, a number of different pieces of legislation were enacted, and this Clean Energy Biofuels Act, this is only one component of it, where for cellulosic ethanol, it's exempt from gasoline tax. I should also say this is a mandate in that same piece of legislation that requires us to use advanced biofuels for both heating and transportation starting next July. And of course, advanced biofuels takes into account indirect land use implications for any feedstock. It's going to be very interesting to implement that program. It's very difficult. Also in 2008 was the Green Communities Act that was signed into law by Governor Patrick. And this really upped the ante for combined heat and power utilizing biomass. As you can see from the slide, it also talks about alternative technologies, and in that alternative is some non-renewable technologies. I don't deal with that. I deal with the biomass component of it. What it does is it allows us to have a market for the thermal energy, for credits, alternative portfolio credits for the thermal component of CHP. In the past, under the renewable portfolio standard, if you're not familiar with the concept, is that you can sell RECs, renewable energy credits, in the open marketplace as income for your project. Now a developer can sell RECs and receive not only for the electrical generation, but for the thermal if it's combined heat and power. That's a big step forward to advancing more efficient technologies and reaping better benefits from each little piece of sustainable biomass that we can extract. The Massachusetts Sustainable Forest Bioenergy Initiative. We've been working on this for 3 years now. It's funded by the U.S. Department of Energy and our Massachusetts Renewable Energy Trust. There's $750,000 into this one study to really look at biomass and develop strategic planning process for how we're going to use biomass in the future. It also has given us a lot of technical information, resource assessments, everything from equipment lineup in the woods to, let me go through a few of them right now, actually. So what we have here is a couple studies, one showing the potential economic impact of utilizing biomass in Massachusetts. It's been mentioned earlier. Really the key issue is economic impact, and there's enormous economic impacts with the utilization of biomass. And we need to keep stressing that. We looked at the advanced biopower technology, harvest systems for biomass. We created a wood pellet heating pamphlet, and we also started to look at silvicultural and ecological considerations of forests from using biomass. Very hot topic in the United States right now. The whole word of sustainability, what does it mean? How do you define it? As a forester, I can define it, but when we start talking about all the other components of a forest, it's really gets very complex. We did assessments of biomass, and we also looked at potential crops. So this project is still ongoing, and we still have a couple more studies to complete, but it's given us a wealth of technical information that we are using to show the legislators and to show the policymakers that we have a substantial amount of biomass. Here's how we can use it and address some of the issues associated with it. Massachusetts is small, And from our work, we determined that we have about 1 million green tons of sustainable biomass available to us. And I'm sorry I didn't do the conversion, but that's a fraction, a very, very small fraction of what's available in Ontario. And we're trying to utilize it as much as we possibly can. Biomass thermal has got great appeal in Massachusetts. The project that Ed, I mentioned earlier, that you can hear tomorrow, that Ed led up, really showed and demonstrated how a public institution, that's where we worked at a public college, with absolutely no money, can change its entire infrastructure at no cost to the college and save and have a positive cash flow value in year one. The thermal applications are very efficient. They're small scale, they're community sized, and there's just a lot of attributes, positive attributes that are associated with them. We're continuing that work, and we've done some assessments of some state field offices to get them off of number 2 oil and put in small, efficient pellet boiler systems. We have an open solicitation now for $15 million for anybody within Massachusetts to apply for putting in a pellet or solid wood heating system, whether it be for one building or a district energy system. We also have a rather unique little program doing a change out for outdoor wood boilers. I don't know if they're on the landscape here, but they're definitely being used in the rural parts of Massachusetts, and they become a nuisance. And they become a nuisance because neighbors don't like smoke. That's simple. So every town that gets a complaint puts together an ordinance and prohibits these things. Well, we came up with an idea of putting a pot of money together to basically do a change-out program. If you own one of these machines, we'll buy you, free of charge, a brand new EPA-certified Phase 2 boiler that you can put in your backyard and hopefully alleviate that nuisance. We'll also put in a highly efficient pellet boiler, indoor pellet boiler, if it meets certain requirements. Why am I telling you folks this? Because perception. The perception, if this person is polluting, well, this person might be polluting, and it's becoming a major issue in Massachusetts and in many of the states in New England, quite frankly. And I would suggest no matter what parts of remote Ontario you might be looking at a project, public perception can just be terrible as far as moving a project forward. You need to really think about how you deal with the public and their whole concept of pollution, sustainability, and doing something that might be bad for the environment. Installed projects. I mentioned Mount Wachusett Community College. We just completed a conversion of a small visitor center in what's called the Quabbin Reservoir. Quabbin Reservoir is about 70 miles west of Boston and provides the entire drinking water for metropolitan Boston area. So now their whole visitor center is heated with biomass. These small demonstration projects that are very visible on the landscape, a lot of people go through that visitor center, gives everybody the right information that they need to know to support biomass projects. We have a program in the state called Leading by Example, where we want state agencies to take the lead. Reduce electrical consumption, make sure that their buildings are well insulated and not losing a lot of energy, and also thinking about renewable energy technologies. And in that program, there's a number of schools, colleges, and places that we're in trying to install biomass heating or CHP systems. And there's a list of a few right there. And lastly, in that component is another piece of legislation, the Green Communities Act, that's given us the ability, with a pot of money, to go to every city and town in Massachusetts, 351 of them, and say, we're going to come in and do energy audits of all your municipal buildings for free. Now, there's something in return. We want them to implement some of the energy conservation measures that our engineers have identified. But as we're going through, we're looking for opportunities for clean tech. And clean tech is really, for the most part, solar thermal to a small degree, photovoltaics, and by the way, Ron, photovoltaics in Massachusetts are still about $8, so they are not in the price range of the West Coast. But also biomass, small heating systems. Again, the opportunities are incredibly great. In Massachusetts, there are pellet companies looking to install plants, about 200,000 ton per year plants. One of the things that we've been looking at is some of the European technologies for small scale heating systems. We found out that there's a lot of great technologies that are not in the United States. But they can't be, and they also can't be used in the United States because of regulations and how we look at pressure vessels. So we conducted a study that we just completed that looked at the differences between the American Society of Mechanical Engineers ASME certification process for vessels, pressure vessels, and the EN 303-5, which is the European Union standard for vessels, so that we can try to work within the system to have a policy in place where maybe we can start putting these systems in the United States legally and start using some of these very efficient, 90% efficiency technologies. We also looked at air emissions and how the Europeans look at air emissions versus how, in our particular case, Massachusetts does. And there are some drastic differences. One of the most striking is that when a European manufacturer builds a small boiler, they just anticipate that the consumer is going to operate that boiler correctly. In the United States, it's just the opposite. We build these things so with the understanding that people are going to throw anything in them, green wood, dry wood. They're going to stoke them down to create lots of particulate matter. And so it was very striking to see the differences. The Massachusetts has a renewable trust, puts a lot of money into renewable projects on an annual basis. Just this past year, now they're able to contribute to thermal projects because it was a charge off of people's electricity bill that actually funded the trust. So now they can support thermal, and I think that's a great thing for Massachusetts. So there are a lot of future plans for the forests of Massachusetts and working with thermal activities, and I'm not going to read all these, but it is important to note that we're spending a lot of effort and time and money to continue that type of work. And most prominently is a very recent policy study that we are just signing a contract with a vendor that is really going to start to look at what is sustainable forest management, carbon sequestration from biomass, and the net effect of biomass energy on atmospheric carbon balance. Important issues because there's a lot of people in Massachusetts and starting to grow in numbers and direction that are saying that biomass is not carbon neutral, that it does affect the carbon balance, that it is not sustainable. And they're saying these things without a lot of real information. So we decided to take the high road and deliver the technical information that shows that they're incorrect, that it is carbon neutral, that it will not have a negative effect on our forest long-term health and viability if done correctly. And I should say that Massachusetts has had forest harvesting regulations since 1940. We're not shy of regulations in Massachusetts. We pretty much regulate everything. So our regulations are in place, they're doing a good job, and we're trying to prove it to the public. This is an important piece of work for all of southern New England because New York is seeing the pressure and definitely all the other states surrounding us. So that's my presentation today. Thank you so much, and we hope to entertain questions later.